Welcome once again to another edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host this week, Dr. John Cook, and with me today is Kevin Moody. Kevin earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Physics and Math from Indiana and a Master of Science degree in Physics from Ball State. And while studying physics as a graduate student at Kent State, he had a transformational experience on May 4th, 1990, the 20th anniversary of the Kent State shooting. And the university drastically scaled back a ceremony memorializing the Kent State tragedy. An atheist-turned-conservative Christian, Moody experienced a profound bond with people unlike him, countercultural hippies, during the protests of the university. And his book, The Battle of Fort Rock, is the story of that journey. Kevin, welcome to the program.
Well, nice to be here.
You know, the book says that this novel is fiction because you changed names to protect the innocent and the guilty, I guess. And you mentioned that at one time you were an atheist. You don't talk much about that in the book so much as your life as a transformed Pentecostal Christian.
Well, yes, and I think there's another thing that ties it together: the attempt at a perpetual motion machine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, it's like sure, I couldn't build a good prototype as a teenager, but I had a lot of things happen that God directed.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is sort of the story of your recognition of the importance of loving your neighbor as yourself, even if they're quite different from you. But there's also a lot of other stories that are kind of woven into this. Your study of physics, you thought you had found because of the contradiction between two physics laws, the law of conservation of energy and the inverse square law in magnetism, you thought that there was going to be a perpetual motion machine that would transform the generation of energy in this country. And that's sort of one of the background stories while you're studying graduate and undergraduate physics on your way to this adventure at Kent State.
Right. In fact, I probably don't talk about it that much at all because I think it's kind of boring to talk about how you find machinists and reject them, have difficulty building a valid test, you know. But still, in the process of doing it, I would become a friend of Kent State's hippies. It would start out with security on the project. I would have three friends get under something that at least looked like a hex. I couldn't really tell whether it was or it wasn't, but the coincidences pointed to it being such, and I prayed about it, and the hex went away in the first two cases. The third case was challenged. I had to go.
There's several subplots in here. One of the things that's clear is that you very much like fried chicken and French fries with Mountain Dew. You have some friends that you have made through the course of your life that you enjoy spending time with, and they have their own life problems. And you also have a lot going on with your family business around the production of fiberglass for various contractors. And in the midst of it all, there's a lot of interesting detail. And again, this novel is fiction, but mostly because you changed names, not the details. So I was curious about the fact that you talk at great length about covens of witches and warlocks and demonic worship and human sacrifice that seem to be going on in North Texas and southern Oklahoma. And I'm wondering how much of that was part of your reality in the real experience.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I've had to pray for a lot of people that had a lot of things going wrong in their life. They came in contact with, one of my friends came in contact with witches and demons at a bookstore. Not the one listed in the book because it changed locations. And he fell under a hex. He acted strange, and we prayed for him, and he came out of it, you know. I asked God to destroy the coven, and God did. There was literally a store that did burn to the ground about 3 or 4 days after I prayed, and I found out about it later. I was surprised. I didn't think that God would do that fast, you know. It was a surprise.
We were looking at the events of your life as you went through graduate school and worked hard to save your family's business and had a lot of adventures along the way. But one of the things I was fascinated by was how much activity that you were aware of with regard to witches and Satan worship and human sacrifice and hexes on people you knew.
We were... sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Well, I was trained by one of the best Christians in the country, but because they changed the names of the hometown, to protect the innocent, they can't really give the name. But I was trained by one of the best Christians in the country, and they knew how to handle about anything that happened in Christianity, including witches and hexes. This Christian Marine recruiter approached the bookstore and found a temptation with pornography there, and at first he fell apart under it, and then he pled the blood of Jesus and left, and came back to them and gave them a good confrontation. Well, that wasn't enough to scare the witches out of committing their sin. Well, one of my friends, I was with him, he came with me, and he saw they hadn't yet repented of the witchcraft. They were still selling things like voodoo dolls and pornography in the store. Well, that had something to do with hurting one of my friends, possibly two of them. So I asked God to burn the place to the ground. No, I was in prayer. Nobody heard me. I was in my car, and I would have had the money to hire it done, or wouldn't have known how to burn the place down if I wanted to. I put that in God's hands, and about 10 days later, I found out it was burned to the ground. The entire mini mall containing the store.
So that was the store that had witchcraft books and voodoo dolls and pornography in it, yes?
Yes, and it hurt two of my friends. Well, that hex is pretty easy to take care of, although a bit painful. It was, as soon as I found out about it, was beaten by prayer, first by God delivering the friends, and secondly by God destroying the bookstore that contacted the friends, But then there's another hex discovered around 1984, or discovered May 4th of 1985. That one wasn't so easy. I wasn't really backed by the great Christians I was before, Oh, I would pray for him, and God would end the hex. But it would entail a lot of battles with witchcraft.
Yeah.
One of which was my best friend at my graduate school. He would be harassed by the people claiming to be witches, and he'd be scared. And I'd ask God to help him, and I was successful at it. But there were about 3 confrontations. The third one, I got so mad at the devil that me and Dan's power of God chased the witches out of town. But that hex was still not done. No, victory had to go through Kent. It was God's way, The only place I could get a scholarship in physics because I failed at Morgantown was to go to Kent State University, Unfortunately, it wasn't my first choice. There were the hippies there. I didn't know how to handle them or what to do with them, And I had hoped maybe the catalog was the truth and it was all resolved, but it really wasn't, Well, I had to be writing, Kent. If I made a mistake in Kent, I'd risk my best friend fictionally depicted as Johnny Oilstring. I'd risk losing him to a hex. He was not, and admittedly, Ardmore, Oklahoma is a fictitious location, just because of the way the story was written. But he represented a real friend in around my hometown, And I had to be right about Kent. Get that wrong, I couldn't pray for him, and nobody else was there to pray for him either.
Well, now
I had to be right about Kent.
Well, now Johnny Oilstring was an interesting friend because you had a good time with him, but he often had girl troubles and financial troubles, and actually was sometimes unforgiving of you when you wouldn't give him money to help him out of his financial troubles. But you stuck by him as a friend through all of that. Why was that?
Well, probably just because I was somebody who'd stick by friends in a natural way, Those are little things that we should forgive as a Christian, and well, thank God I was able to, I mean, who am I to judge? I mean, if they don't hurt me that much, then, I mean, he had financial problems and needed help. God provided for me, made up for the financial losses. As for the hex, that's an abomination unto the Lord.
Sure.
Any Christian has the power to pray for somebody under a hex and revoke it or suspend it, You see, black magic only works so much. God's more powerful than it.
And you do believe...
You have one weakness. You know how Superman had to deal with kryptonite? I had to stay right with God.
Okay, yeah, I remember you mentioning that this was the same thing as kryptonite to Superman in the book, particularly.
Yes, I mean, it was. Yeah, I mean, it was that way. I mean, and if I would lose Dave Colcart to a hex if I didn't do the right thing with Kent State's hippies, because I would no longer be right with God. I'm sure I could stumble, but in the end, I had to make the right decision.
Well, now there's some other discussions here that I find interesting around hexes and witchcraft. One of them is that occasionally you spent time to relieve those through fasting and prayer, and you also had plans to kind of circumnavigate the area where you thought they were located with your truck, continuing to pray. It
was a '84 Cavalier at the time.
Okay.
I never really described it. Well, sometimes circumnavigating it came from the idea that when I dealt with Antoine, the sorcerer Antoine, he might have a different name in the book. When I came across the first sorcerer, he had a weakness. He couldn't project his power more than a city block away, Well, God could project his power all around the world. All I had to do was be on the way to church and ask God to destroy him, and the place was burned to the ground. Circumnavigating has its purpose. I think Jesus Christ even healed somebody at a long distance, I didn't know who the witches were.
Okay.
And sometimes they were trips that were conveniently planned, like I was going to have a meeting with my scriptural analyst, Robert Elite, when we had one of the big exorcism raids. This is a way of praying on the way to the meeting,
There are organizations you mentioned that I don't know if you initiated them or were part of them. Occult defense.
A lot of these were a part of my attempt to build a perpetual motion machine. Now, University Christian Fellowship was a real college organization, for example, but the Board of Judges of Indiana was almost a club. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but and we a lot of times use certain rules to decide when to go into prayer against witches and stuff, Sometimes we made mistakes with it, but one of the big things was when a hex hit one of my friends, I might use different wording for organizations and stuff, but when a hex hit one of my friends or one of their friends, we went out and prayed for them. If that didn't do any good, we went out and rebuked the warlock, Of course, when we don't know where the warlock is, sometimes prayer on the open highways is the best way to get to it, because a car's a great prayer closet,
Okay. Yeah.
You know, a home can be the same thing, but for me, the car often worked better, you know.
What about
I think sometimes that might have been a matter of preference of me and the organization, you know.
Mm-hmm. What about these titles like Occult Defense Commander? Is that part of an organization?
Well, I think they were a bit exaggerated, but if the perpetual motion machine had went, that would have been a real rank, you know.
Ah, I see. And the judges?
I think we were making some of these ranks with the intention that the machine will work, you know.
And we never got our perpetual motion machine. We never cured the energy crisis, right?
Yeah, it never happened. Although, you know, I think there's a lot to be said about it. We ran a test run in 1991, and the prototype didn't work. We thought, you know, I still say it's a valid test, but the model was relatively cheap, so it might have been invalid, but I presumed it wasn't.
Okay. One more question about witches that I'm interested in because of the reference in the book, and then I want to talk about Christians being open to hippies is the lesson you learned at the end here. But you mentioned that Richard Nixon, had access to some of the most powerful witches. How did you know that?
Well, I'll tell you what. A guy named William Schneblin of the Freemasons talked for the Prophecy Club, and he claimed to expose the Masons from within. He said Richard Nixon was a member of the Illuminati. William Schneblin did. He was a 90th degree Mason. He was deep into the organization. At that level, they were into the occult. So he said. And I believe.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
Actually, I don't know. I mean, it would almost be nice to, maybe I should have put a footnote there about that, you know, but I did a few other things that I did, but I never thought to do that, you know. But it has been said that the Masons control a lot of our presidents, and I don't know how they affect them really, you know. That's a story, that's controversy, and I'm not sure really exactly how they affect the presidency. They helped us get our independence, but yet I don't think I'd join them as a Christian, you know.
Yes.
Because they're a secret society, and well, we just don't know what they're about. A lot of speculation about a lot of people saying things. Some people claiming to be from within them, saying there are some diabolical things. But we honestly, I can't say. I'm not an insider. I really don't know what's going on.
See?
I hear good and bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories. Yeah, there's a lot of conspiracy theories around the Freemasons.
I'm not really sure. I mean, I remember one time Bill Schneblin said it would be a miracle if we got through the Y2K. I heard that and said, well, I'm an expert at praying for this country. I think we're going to have a miracle. I didn't really tell him that. Maybe I should have. But in the end, I went to Key Bank. I had a lot of money there, and I said, you know, look, you tell me what you're going to do about getting this Y2K thing right, or when my CDs come due, I'll pull all my money out and go into another bank. Well, I got some response. Corporate office kind of told everybody where they stood. After all, the branch losing $40,000 or $50,000 isn't a nice thing. You know what I mean? The branch manager probably wanted to talk with corporate about that one. You know, you know what I'm saying? And I think when you deal with the target Y2K, God can make a difference in it, and He did. It kind of, I think what I did might have told Key Bank that there may be other customers out there that mean business just like I do. You know, I don't know what happened, or maybe it was just a coincidence. Who knows how people think in corporate America, right?
It was strange how the bank did business with your father's company and even took money from your grandfather's account at some point to pay your father's bill.
Yeah, yeah, and they had to put it all back. My grandpa, when he got it all back, took it all out. Went to another bank. It was a different bank than Key Bank, though, you know. But that was in South Bend, Indiana, you know, where I was living at the time. And it was funny, you know. I would get a letter. I don't know. Did I make a difference in getting them to deal with the Y2K, or at least tell everybody about it? Who knows? I probably made a little one, because I probably got a branch manager to complain about it and say it was significant to their branch. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Can I tell? No, I can't really tell. When it comes to witches and the occult, they exist in this country. They're very well hidden, because I'll tell you how to move witches to where science will say they don't exist. That was mooted that way in the 50s. We all got to get back to our ways of praying and serving God the way we used to, you know? Was it perfect in the 50s? I guarantee you not.
Right.
Did we make mistakes in the 50s? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think we tried to pray. We tried. Sometimes we weren't perfect. Sometimes we got too superficial. Sometimes we made mistakes. But in the 50s, science couldn't say that witchcraft existed. Everybody was praying, and the witchcraft wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
See, if you're praying for somebody and witch tries to put a hex on you, it isn't going to work.
I see.
You know, two fervent Christians can shut down a hex against anybody that's close to them, that is close to their heart, as long as they're pleasing God, you know. So you think of how a Church of Satan could be shut down in this country. Really pretty simple. I think that parents ought to pray for their children, and their rock singers.
Mm-hmm.
Their rock singers may be affected by the Church of Satan. We don't know the extent. I've read rumors about it in certain Christian books, but I don't really have a first-hand knowledge of it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about one piece of evidence that you found that convinced you that one of your friends had a hex, and it was when you looked at when his bad fortune seemed to be associated with phases of the moon. What led you to that?
Well, I was open-minded to witchcraft, and I took days and dates, you know. And I was astounded to find that all of his bad luck coincided with the phases of the moon, and the probability of that happening was less than 1 in a million.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's one way of looking into whether somebody's hexed or not, is to try and correlate it with phases of the moon, horoscopes, things that come from the devil, you know.
So those astrological signs are things of the devil, and that's why you connected them with those.
Yeah, and that's exactly as I look at it. If I can get out a newspaper horoscope and get 21 of them in a row correct pretty specifically, you know, I in fact categorized it. Mm-hmm. I think there's a good chance of a hex.
Okay. Well, let's turn our attention, we only have about 5 minutes, so let's turn our attention to the Battle of Kent State, because you have a very interesting story about your own life there, encountering a lot of what you call hippies, which I thought they were passé by the 80s, but apparently there was a strong movement there that was still part of the SDS.
I may call them hippies and have it narrow,
mm-hmm.
but they were part of the peace movement.
Okay.
They were part of what was left of it. In fact, I think the peace movement exploded all over again in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
The grunge look, you know, a little more subdued because Reagan had had a policy. Their young people harassed them for 10 years, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least maybe Reagan didn't have that policy, but a lot of local police had that kind of policy, you know, depending on the town you were in.
Mm-hmm. Well, at Kent State, when you were working on your doctorate, you encountered a lot of people. You had friends who were aligned with your belief system, conservative Christians that you connected with, but you also had a number of these liberal peacenik types, some of whom were in favor of homosexual rights, some of whom supported the SDS burning down buildings, and
well, I'll tell you what, some of them repented of that. Actually, the whole group repented of burning down buildings, and suggested violence is the wrong way to protest. It gets you nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
They changed.
Mm-hmm. So how did you
repented
become
of violence.
that's a counterculture type, and that doesn't seem to fit with where you were philosophically. How did you come to befriend those folks?
Well, for one, and realize we had to love our neighbors ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, a lot of my old friends like Johnny Oilstring and Robert Elite were sort of countercultural in their own ways. They were both punk rockers. They made great friends.
Mm-hmm.
So when I found out that I should be the friends of Kent State's hippies, it was almost a natural friendship
Mm-hmm.
because of some of the other good friends I had.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Well, these folks, you began to consider aligning with them if, in fact, they were right about the fact that the governor who had ordered the guard onto the Kent State campus hadn't repented or owned up to his sin.
No, it's not. It's not quite that. It wasn't necessarily the governor. It was the catalog. The catalog insinuated that, well, they were they had settled with the students in Kent about May 4th,
Mm-hmm.
and that anybody who was a protester anymore was a communist or something kind of weird. It wasn't the mainstream. They said they resolved that so well that that was the case. Well, when I went to Kent, it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And if the catalog was right, and things resolved, well, the people who were doing the protests and stuff, they were in the minority. They were probably trouble causers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I could understand steering clear of a trouble causer type that had no justification, But, in fact, I think I said they were communists.
Uh-huh.
If the catalog were the truth. Well, I come in there hearing this thing has been resolved, and the first thing you hear, the controversy's still on.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that kind of said that Kent didn't resolve this thing so that you'd have a peaceful campus. You wouldn't have to worry about activism and stuff, I was hoping that Kent had resolved that. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir. I have 1 minute, and I've got to.
If they didn't resolve it, well, guess what? You were wrong with God if you hated them. They were possibly good Americans who got wrong. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I want to ask one more thing.
Sorry.
I got to ask one more thing before we close, and that is, do Christians have more in common with hippie liberals than they realize?
Yes. Yes. I mean, they don't always agree on when to cut somebody off or something, but I think they all try to be good friends. They try to be good to their fellow man. They some of them are Christians,
Mm-hmm.
at least in the old days.
Very good.
And we need to understand that if we would try to talk out some of our differences, the country could be healed.
Let's all hope for that. Yeah, that would be a great thing.
Talking out differences is often the best way to be friends.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to talk out and forgive out differences with Johnny Oilstring. That was a pretty hard guy to do it with sometimes, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that in most cases, maybe with the exception of the American Muslim, I think that we can talk out our differences, and maybe that can even be talked out. I've heard some Muslims coming out and saying, "Why not Al-Qaeda?"
Uh-huh. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. But there's kind of a hope you could even talk stuff out with them, but I don't have the knowledge of how to do it, and I don't think too many American Christians have the knowledge of how to talk things out with Muslims right now,
Mm-hmm.
But it could possibly be done. I think that in order to protect the freedom of the Muslims, what the Muslims have to do is they have to step up and say, we're not Al-Qaeda, and make sure they have nothing to do with them,
Mm-hmm.
Don't help with recruiting.
Uh-huh.
Turn in people that are, if they see them. They may not. I mean, you know how that is, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. We've been talking with Kevin Moody. His book, The Battle of Fort Rock, God's Battle for Kent State in 1990, is an interesting read about a variety of viewpoints and Christians' trying to save the world from other forces. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. I remind you, if you don't hear our radio show during its regular broadcast, you can catch us on YouTube. The channel is Good Books Radio, Strong and Cook. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. Thanks for listening.